Okay, so let's talk about how to buy a car and how to get the best possible deal when negotiating for buying a vehicle. Now, let's be honest, the car buying process for most people, it can be stressful, it can be time consuming, and it can be just outright not fun. But hopefully this video can give you some ideas as to how you can get that best possible price for a vehicle. And if you've ever walked into a car dealership and gotten the price of a vehicle in a 15-minute span, then there's probably a good chance that you aren't getting the best possible deal. It usually takes some time, takes some effort in order to negotiate, going back and forth to get that perfect price that you're looking for. But it's important to realize that the car dealer's trying to make money and you're trying to save money. So we have this conflict of interest and you have to meet somewhere in the middle in most cases. So let's talk about how to actually go through this process of buying a vehicle. And the first step to doing this is to build some knowledge, to gain some knowledge on these vehicles and to know how much they're actually worth. One of the biggest mistakes that so many people make is they walk into a car dealership not knowing the true value of the vehicle that they're looking to buy. So in 2019, it's never been easier to get this information to know how much a car is going to be worth. So you can go onto something like Kelley Blue Book or TrueCar or a variety of other websites that will give you the value or at least a price estimate of how much a vehicle is worth based off of the make and the model and the year and the mileage on that vehicle to give you a range of maybe, that car is worth between $17,000 and $19,000. You can use that information to bring it into the car dealership and say, this is how much that these sources are saying that these cars are worth. They might try to discredit them, say, oh, those aren't accurate, but it's something that you can use to help kind of prove your point and negotiate for getting a better price for a vehicle. Now, something else that you want to do is you want to keep something in mind called the 24-10 rule. Now, this is a rule of thumb that is important to at least keep in mind. You don't have to necessarily follow it, but you want to be aware of it. So the 24-10 rule, essentially what this will be is you want to be able to at least afford 20% down on a vehicle. If you have no money in your bank account and you're taking advantage of no money down, $0 down car loan at a car dealer, that might be a sign that maybe you shouldn't be buying this car. Maybe it's too expensive for this vehicle if you can't afford to pay at least 20% down on that vehicle. Now that doesn't mean that you have to use 20% down. You can buy a car in cash, or you could do 0% down, but make sure that you have at least enough money that you could afford it theoretically if you wanted to. Now, the 4 in the 24-10 rule stands for 4-year loan. So you want to be able to at least afford being able to pay monthly payments on a 4-year loan. If you have to stretch those loans out to 6 or 7 or 8-year loans, so maybe 60-month loans or 72-month loans or 84-month loans, and you have to stretch it out to be able to afford those monthly payments, then that's also a sign that you're paying too much for this vehicle. Maybe you should get not the BMW, but maybe you should get the Ford Focus, or not the Audi, but maybe get a cheaper $15,000 or $10,000 car to suit your needs to get you from point A to B. I think a lot of people go for those cars that are just too expensive and out of their range because they want to look cool, or they want something that's just a little bit more flashy or can show their neighbors that they're doing very well, when in fact it's actually making you poorer, because cars are very expensive. We've talked about that many times on this channel. The true cost of a vehicle, very expensive when you factor in depreciation, insurance, wear and tear, taxes, a variety of other different expenses on cars. It's going to be so expensive. So that's something you want to think about. And then the 10 in the 24-10 rule stands for 10% of your income should be going towards the cost of owning and operating this vehicle. So this is just another kind of rule of thumb that you can stick by. So if you are paying $600 in monthly payments for a vehicle and you're only making $30,000 a month, that could be a sign that you're paying too much for this vehicle and you should be getting a cheaper, less expensive car. So those are just some good things to think about. And you also want to understand the value of your trade-in. So if you have a current vehicle at the moment, you're thinking about trading it in to buy a new car or a used car at the car dealership, you want to know the value of that vehicle before you walk into the dealer. So there's a couple things that I want you to do, some homework that you want to do before you even go into a car dealership. Before you step foot into any car dealership, there's a few things you want to do. And one of them is actually getting some offers on your current vehicle or your trade-in so that you're able to see how much people are actually willing to pay for this vehicle. Now, you could list it as a private sale, maybe see what kind of offers you get on that vehicles, or you could even go into some other dealerships and say, you know what, I have this car, I'm willing to sell it, how much are you willing to pay me for it? And they can give you those numbers, and once you get those numbers, make sure you compile them and bring those numbers, bring those printout or those papers to the car dealership where you're thinking about buying a car, so that when they talk about your trade-in car, you can say, you know what, I actually have offers from these 3 other people, these 3 other different buyers who are willing to pay $500 more or $1,000 more for this car. So that's kind of a way to call them out and say that, you know, this dealership is lowballing you when you're trying to use it as a trade-in. So that's just another bargaining chip that you can use. Now, when going into a dealership, dealership, you're kind of like playing poker. You want to keep your cards close to you, and there's a couple different cards that we'll talk about further on in this video. But another thing you want to do before you step foot in a car dealership is you want to make sure that you can get some private lending or go to a bank, your local bank, and see what kind of loans you can get through them. So walking in with financing beforehand is going to be such a benefit, because what this will do is it'll do one of two things. It can either save you a lot of headache from talking to the finance department at a car dealership, but also you can actually make them bid against each other and pit them against each other. So if you go through the whole car buying process, you talk to the salesman, they're talking to the manager, you get the price that you're looking for, then you talk to the finance department, and if they slap you with some high interest rates, then you can say, you know what, I actually have a loan offer from the bank down the road that's going to give me a better interest rate. So if you can beat that interest rate, then I'll consider getting the loan with you. So you're bidding them against each other to get the lowest possible rate. It's a very smart idea in a lot of cases to walk in there pre-approved for a loan from your local bank or some other financial institutions. All right, so like I said, this is kind of like playing poker. So when you go into the dealership, you want to hold your cards close, and some of those cards are your trade-in. So you don't necessarily want to really talk about the trade-in that you might be wanting to do, your current vehicle. Try not to talk about that too much, as well as financing. You don't really want to talk about financing as much. It's better for them to know less about your trade-in and your pre-approved financing so that you can focus on getting a better deal for the actual price of a vehicle. So if you've seen Marco from Whiteboard Finance's video, he talked about the 4-square method. Great channel, by the way. 4-square method, where essentially the car dealer will talk about the trade-in value of a car, they'll talk about the price, they'll talk about monthly payments, and then the down payment for that vehicle. So this is the 4-square method, and what they'll do is they'll try to really talk about anything except for the price of that vehicle. But what it turns out is that you want to actually focus on getting that price of that vehicle down. So they might try to smudge some monthly payments, they might try to lower those monthly payments, or they might try to lower the down payment. But what you really want to focus on is the price of that vehicle first. So there's a couple different tactics that you can use, but generally speaking, you're probably going to have to go back and forth between talking to the salesperson, then they're going to go back to their sales manager, talk to them, and maybe lower the price by a couple $100, and then go back and forth a couple of times. Now, you want to really hold your guns and stick to your price as much as possible. What I would say is it usually takes at least 2 to 3 times of them going back and forth to get to a price that you're more satisfied with. So if you go in there saying that you want to pay $20,000 for this car that they listed for $23,000, hold your guns. Make sure that you are able to display some confidence. When you're walking into that dealership, walking in with confidence rather than kind of with your head down, kind of afraid to speak up. If you don't like a price, if you don't like something about the car, point it out and be able to do that, because knowing that you are not being able to kind of just be thrown around like a rag doll, because that's what some dealers will do. And no offense to them, car dealers have to make their money as well. But if you're walking in there timid and afraid and not able to speak up and voice your opinion, then you are going to just get beat up essentially and end up signing a paper for something that you really just didn't want, and end up with a car for a price that you weren't satisfied with, but you just felt as though you were obligated or somehow got talked into it or persuaded into buying that car for that specific price. So in a lot of cases, and this happens to some of my friends, they'll say, Nate, should I buy this vehicle or not? And I say, well, how much are you paying for the monthly payments? And they'll show me this chart and I say, how much is the interest rate? In a lot of cases, they just don't know. And sometimes the dealers won't really talk about it. They'll just talk about the monthly payments. And what they'll do, if they get you down into the monthly payment area where they're trying to save you some money, what happens pretty often actually is if you say, you know what, I can't afford this monthly payment, this 4-year loan for $400 a month, I just can't do it, I'd like to get it lower. And they say, well, let me see what I can do. And they fudge some numbers, and the next thing you know, you're signing a 7-year or a 5-year or a 6-year loan for that car for a lower monthly payment. But if you actually calculate it, you're actually sometimes paying more over the long run for those payments. So they're trying to save you money, but they're actually making more money off of you. So there's something to keep in mind. What I would consider doing, either walk in with a physical calculator with you, or have a calculator on your phone so that you can calculate those payments and calculate the math for yourself right there. You can, you let the dealer try to calculate those things for you, but sometimes they can make mistakes. It's better to just do it yourself and pull out the calculator and do it for yourself to get the best idea as to how much you're going to be paying for those loans and paying for the price of that vehicle. But the most important thing, as I said, is to focus on the price of that vehicle, nothing else but the price of that vehicle. Then over time, you can talk about your trade-in. Try not to talk about it at first. And if they keep bugging you about it, just say, you haven't made up your mind yet. You're not quite sure. You'd rather just talk about the price first. Now, when you're negotiating with car dealers, there's just going to be times where they're not willing to come down further than a certain price, and they're really going to hold their ground on it it. And for most cases, it's going to be because they do need to make some money. They need to make some money off of you, and they might not be able to come lower than a certain price. And in that case, I would suggest walking out, especially if it does not meet your needs. If you're willing to pay $20,000 because you know that the value of that car is $20,000, and they're trying to get 23, and they're not coming down further than say 22.5 or 22,000, and you're not happy with that, just walk away. You have to go in there knowing that you're willing to walk away. The amount of times that I've walked out of car dealerships is kind of ridiculous, and it can take a lot of time. It can be time consuming, but if you can hold your guns, you're going to get a better deal over the long run if you're willing to do that and not get bullied around. But once you kind of settle with the price, if you're satisfied with the price, then you can get to the point where you start talking about some other things that are going to be involved. So they might have you talk to the finance department. Hopefully you already have a pre-approved loan, so you can use that against them to get a better rate. And if they're not willing to do that, then just use your own private lending. Use your loan from your local bank or from some other financial institution, so that you don't have to go through that headache of talking to the finance department. Then they're probably going to try to slap on a number of different fees on top of the price of this car. So you think you're paying $22,000 for this car, but then all of a sudden you see all these different fees. Now, there's going to be some that you can't get out of regardless. So for example, taxes, you can't get out of those. There's going to be registration potentially. There's going to be destination fees that are going to be hard to get out of. But then there's also going to be ones on there that you can just call out and say, you know what, I know this is BS. I don't have to pay this. And sometimes just calling them out entirely is going to be an effective method for getting those fees removed. For example, the dock fee, in a lot of cases, they'll try to charge $200 or $300 or more for this dock fee. In a lot of cases, you can just say, I'm not paying this. I know this is BS. And you can even say, you Googled this and you know that this fee doesn't have to be there. It's 100% markup for the car dealer. It's a great way for them to make some extra cash on top of you. And they'll try to say, this is a necessary fee. We have to charge this fee. We can't get out of charging this fee. But a great way to tell is whether or not they need to charge that fee or whether they don't have to have that fee is whether you're paying sales tax on that fee or not. So if you're not paying sales tax on that fee, then you probably do have to pay it. But if you're paying sales tax, that means that that's the dealer incurring that cost and you probably don't have to pay it, so you can get those prices down as well. And I've seen a number of different ways that people actually get around some of these fees. Sometimes people will actually just write the check and say, well, I already wrote the check for $22,000. Now I have to write a new check, and that can be just a way for people to kind of get out of some of those fees. But you can just really hold your ground on that as well, and they're not going to be happy when you try to get out of them, but it is something that you can take advantage of. But once again, cars are very expensive when you factor in all the different costs of owning and operating a vehicle. So what I would suggest doing is buying a used car. If you're buying a new one, as soon as you drive it off the lot, you're instantly losing a percentage, about 10% of the cost of that vehicle. So try to buy a car that's at least a couple years old, still in pretty good condition, that's going to last you a while, and that's going to help you as well. But just keep in mind, look, don't overpay for a car, and don't buy a car that you cannot afford. I see too many people buying BMWs and Audis and WRXs and Escalades and Suburbans that they just can't afford, and I think that's just a mistake. It's going to hurt you in the long run if you're trying to build wealth and become financially free over the long run. So go with the car that's more economical. I just think it's a great option, and people aren't going to laugh at you, but maybe they won't think that you're the coolest person in the neighborhood as well, but you're going to be cooler than them once you are financially free and you can retire at age 45 or age 50 rather than waiting till you're 65 or 70 to retire like most people. So thanks for watching the video. Appreciate all the support on the channel, really do, and I'll see everybody in the next video.